Okay, and now we are recording. Darn good thing I pushed that button. Can you imagine going through the whole hour without having pushed that record button? Hey, I've done it. Ended up having to do the entire Zoom session a second time. To nobody this time. Anyway, this is March 26th. At 2019, we are looking at Psychoacoustics Unit 4, and last week we began this unit. Today we'll finish this unit on threshold, methods of measurement, all that stuff when you're doing hearing tests. What are thresholds? Well, they're the softest that you can just barely hear. And last week we called those absolute thresholds, the detection of presence versus absence of a sound. Absolute threshold. Did you hear it or did you not? And we talked a lot about false positives, true positives, false negatives, true negatives. If the tone was present and you said, yup, true positive. If the tone was absent and you didn't say anything, true negative. Sometimes people guess. So when you're getting really close to your softest level that you can hear, the task becomes difficult. And now you begin to enter bias and mistakes. And you're guessing now, you're not always so sure. And that's what's happening in a hearing test. And so a clinician has to be aware of the fact that when you're getting down really close to threshold, to what someone's real hearing ability is, the task becomes difficult. And you're going to get your Herbs, the guy who doesn't want to raise his hand until he's positive he hears the tone. And you're going to get your Mrs. McGillicuddies who are going to raise their hands guessing constantly. Remember that? All of that stuff. Let's just kind of bring that home, okay? And then we said the way in which we test thresholds is called the method of limits. And the method of limits means the clinician adjusts the tone, not the client. The clinician changes the intensity. The clinician changes the frequency. And the second part of method of limits is the clinician does so in fixed increments, in 5 or 10 dB steps. And then we said, how do we use the method of limits? We use the ascending-descending approach, the Hughson-Westlake, Hughson, H-U-G-H-S-O-N, Hughson-Westlake, which means you'll start at a level that the person certainly hears. He raises a hand or pushes a button. You descend by 10. If he still hears it, you descend by 10 again. If he doesn't hear it, you ascend by 5. If he doesn't hear it, you ascend by 5. Hears it. Good. Descend by 10. Doesn't hear it. Ascend by 5, doesn't hear it. Ascend by 5, he does hear it. That's threshold. 2 ascending responses at the same decibel level. So, absolute threshold, how do we test it? Method of limits. And how do we use method of limits? Because you can use method of limits with a descending approach. You can use method of limits with an ascending approach. We use a combination of both of those. Good. And we began last week's talk with a little discussion about differential thresholds. And that's a totally different thing. That's done more in research. It's like you already hear a tone. What's the smallest change you needed to make in order for the person to notice a difference? And you can do that along the dimension of intensity. You can do that along the dimension of frequency. You can do that along the dimension of time. As time, sound takes place in 3 dimensions: frequency, intensity, and time. Now, the frequency thing has a little bit of importance. The frequency thing is, what's the smallest change you need to make in frequency for the person to notice a change? If you hear 1,000 hertz at 50 dB, if I make it 1,001, will you hear that? Or will I have to make it 1,005 for you to hear the difference? And that plays a big part in our field, because people with hair cell damage in the inner ear, they have worse frequency resolution. In other words, they need bigger changes in frequency for them to notice a change in frequency. And we called that delta F, right? What's the just noticeable difference? So with hearing aids and people with hearing loss, really a lot depends on frequency resolution. They have lost a lot of ability to distinguish between frequencies close together. And since they can't hear those differences, they need bigger changes to notice a difference. That's why people with hearing aids, their biggest complaint is hearing in noise. They have a harder time separating speech from background noise. Why? Because of decreased ability to distinguish between frequencies close together. So there's a little story, okay, that we did. Now let's talk about sharing screen, and let's go to look at our notes and see where it was that we were. Where were we in psychoacoustics? We covered all kinds of stuff. So we moved on down. Differential threshold, absolute threshold, signal and noise. There's your true positives. Whoa, 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 I'm jumping all over the place here. There's your true positives, your true negatives right over here. Okay, and there's where bias can come into the picture, Herb and Mrs. McGillicuddy. And last week we did that. We walked right through all of that. We talked about method of limits here. We talked about an ascending approach, a descending approach, and we use the Houston-Westlake ascending-descending approach. But notice in all these 1, 2, and 3, method of limits can be applied in various ways. The clinician can adjust the tone and can do so in fixed increments, ascending. The clinician can adjust the tone and do so in fixed increments, descending. Or the clinician can control the intensity and frequency and use a combination of those. All right, then last week we got to MAF and MAP. This is where we finished, and this is where we will begin today. You will recall, and let's just kind of look at a picture here in our PowerPoints. We get to right where we need to be here. You will recall this picture from acoustics a long time ago. A wee bit of review here. Recall this from Unit 2. What's the softest level it takes to just barely hear a 1,000 hertz tone at 1 meter distance from a speaker with 2 ears? And we said the softest pressure against the eardrum required to do that was 0.0002 dynes per centimeter squared. And we called that 0 dB SPL. Well, what happens if we play that same game at 2,000 hertz? And at 3,000 hertz, let's see. And this, you're going to start getting curves. Always curves. We talked a little bit about this last week. What's the softest pressure against your eardrum required to hear something at 1,000 hertz, 2,000 hertz, 4,000? Look at how the curve goes down here. So your hearing gets even better than 0 dB SPL. And lots of researchers played the same game, and lots of them found the same curve. And that's where we're going to take you today, to minimal audible field, MAF. The softest level required, and this curve here is reminiscent of all these curves over here. Okay? All we're doing is just taking one general curve that's accepted today. We call that minimal audible field. So notice 1,000 hertz. We call that 0, the softest it took to hear a 1,000 hertz tone, 1 meter distance from a speaker with both ears. Now at 2,000 hertz, the softest it took to hear 2,000 hertz at 1 meter distance with 2 ears. And notice it's a little bit less. And 4,000. And then 8,000, our hearing gets worse again. So this is the sweet spot of our hearing. And that's high frequency consonants of speech. High frequency. So our ears are literally made for hearing speech. Literally made for it. They're the shape of your outer ear. The weird dents and bumps in the outer ear. The length of your ear canal. All of those things, the quarter wave resonator, the length of your ear canal, and then the resonance of your concha bowl, and then the resonances of your middle ear ossicles. All the resonances of your outer and middle ears create this. That's what makes this curve. A dog would have a different minimal audible field. A cat would have a different one. But MAF is in white here. The softest level required to just barely hear all the different frequencies at 1 meter distance from a speaker with 2 ears. So you're playing the same game as you did in this situation. only you're playing it now at 2,000 hertz, and then at 4,000 hertz, and then 500 hertz, 250 hertz, all of that. It really hurts, okay? And you'll see that at 125, compared to the softest that you can hear, 1,000 hertz, you require way more decibels. So if we're calling the softest that you can just barely hear 1,000 hertz 0 decibels SPL, look at how much more it takes to hear the lows. See? And then we know we don't test hearing with 2 ears at 1 meter distance from a speaker. We test hearing with 1 ear at a time under a headphone. And when that's the case, you get MAP. And notice it's not quite as low down. It's a little bit higher up, and there's a little bump here, because you've plugged up your outer ear canal, so you've lost the quarter wave resonator because you got a headphone over it. And the MAP curve is about 5 decibels above the MAF curve, because 2 ears are about 5 decibels better than 1. And I think we said last week, if you have 1 ear and you're deaf in the other ear, never think you have a 50% hearing loss, because you don't. You have about a 5 decibel hearing loss. Okay? If your right ear can hear at 10 decibels, the softest it can just barely hear is 10. And the left ear, the softest it can just barely hear is 10. If you present to both ears at the same time, your thresholds will get better. In other words, the softest that you'll just be able to hear will be 5 dB. Okay? Same with if your threshold at 1,000 hertz is 0 dB in this ear, and your threshold at 1,000 hertz is 0 decibels in this ear. In English, that means the softest it took for you to just barely hear. If I presented 1,000 hertz to both ears at the same time, my binaural threshold would be -5. Okay? Very important to know that. So here's minimal audible field taken from a textbook. And this is my drawing of MAF and MAP. And this is MAP taken from a textbook. Now, and I believe it's out of your Lassen Woodford, Hearing Science Fundamentals. Now, they don't draw the little BIMP, the little thing that I do, okay? But just ignore that fact. 2 things you should note here. One is, this is about 5 decibels higher than minimal audible field, about. And the second thing is, the curve is shorter. And that's because we don't test hearing under headphones below 125 hertz. That's why it stops there, okay? Why it goes all the way past 10,000, I don't know either, because the highest that we test hearing in audiometry is 8,000 hertz. But nonetheless, there's a comparison of the 2. And what are those curves basically caused by? The resonances of your outer ear canal and concha bowl, and the resonances of your middle ear ossicles, and the resonance of the little chamber called the middle ear itself. So I say the red plus the blue equals MAF and MAP. Okay, just realize MAP is the softest it took to hear all the different frequencies with 1 ear under a headphone. Okay, so think about it as having 4 steps. 4 steps here, not 4, yeah, not 5, 4. First, what was the softest it took to hear a 1,000 hertz tone at 1 meter distance from a speaker with 2 ears? Once that's defined, and we call that 0, okay, that's step number 1. Step number 2, let's do the same game at all the different frequencies. Minimal audible field. Step 3, let's play the same game with 1 ear under a headphone. Step 4, MAP is capital I, capital S, underline, boldface, italics, is 0 dB hearing level. HL. dB space HL. Very important to grasp that. This curve, this white curve, is the flat line on the audiogram. It is this. There's your audiogram. This flat line at 1,000 has MAP built into it. Okay, so at 1,000 hertz, we call that 0, but in reality, whoops, it's about 10. Okay? At 2,000 hertz, you're looking at 0. In reality, it's about 5. 4,000 hertz, we're calling that 0. In reality, it's kind of, I don't know, about here. Okay? Look at 500 hertz, calling that 0. In reality, I keep going through that slide. In reality, it's about 17, I don't know, 15, something like that. Okay? 250 hertz, it's really about 30. 125 hertz, it's about 40. Okay? So we don't feel like calling this normal. Otherwise, we've got differences across the frequencies. It's a drag. What's that? Okay? So let's just call that, build that curve into the audiometer. Those differences are built in, and that's why your audiometer is calibrated. The instrument that's attached to the headphones, okay, that presents the tones through the wires to the headphones. That instrument costs a lot of money, and it has to hold these values in it. Don't bang it or bump it, or you'll whack it out of calibration. Audiometers need to be calibrated every year to make sure that they retain exactly these values. Cool, huh? All right. So let's now go to our notes and see where we've gone. MAF, MAP. Duration of sound also affects threshold. So look at this. Intensity affects threshold, but so does frequency. Well, that's obvious as seen by this, or as seen by this. Okay? But intensity is also, or duration of threshold of sound is also affected by the duration of a sound. And what do we mean by that? We call that temporal integration or temporal summation. The longer a sound is presented, the easier it is to hear, but only up to a certain point. I mean, your ability to hear da is no worse than your ability to hear da. Okay, but if I make the sound a split second, it's going to be harder for you to hear. If I make it a little bit longer, yeah, now your hearing gets better. Your sensitivity, your hearing thresholds improve. The decibel level it requires to just barely hear a is greater than it is to hear. So up to about 1/3 of a second. Let's see if I've got a nice picture that sort of shows you that, just to give you an idea. Here you go. Okay, when you're looking at this picture, it talks about duration. If a sound is like, look at this, the horizontal axis is milliseconds. Milliseconds. So if a sound is presented for 2 milliseconds, like 2/1/1000th of a second, you're going to have a worse threshold. If your threshold is really 0, if the sound is presented for only a split second, your threshold is going to be 20. If the duration of a sound is increased to 50 milliseconds, that's 1/120th of a second, 1/20th of a second, your threshold will get a little bit better. It'll be about 15. If the threshold is presented for 100 milliseconds, or 1/10th of a second, your threshold will get better. It'll be about 10 dB. If your threshold is presented for 200 milliseconds, or 1/5th of a second, then your threshold improves to as good as it's going to be. After that, increasing the length doesn't make it any better. Okay? All that just means is temporal integration. Below about 200 milliseconds or 300, whatever, below a certain, about 1/3 or 1/5 of a second, you're going to need more intensity to just barely hear that tone, because your body just doesn't have enough neural capacity to grasp the presence of a split second type of tone. That's all we're talking about there. Get it? Good. All righty. Next page. That's all that it says here. Okay. Psychometric functions. Are you kidding me? Oh my God. All right, let's look at these. You're going to look more at this in other courses. Maybe yes, maybe no, but this really relates more to speech testing in audiometry. But let's just look at what we're talking about here. First of all, we're going to look at a picture so we can describe what all this writing here is. So let's first check out a picture right here. A steep performance intensity function. Here's intensity along the horizontal, and here's performance. Okay, what percent did you get right? What percent? All right, so if someone has a hearing threshold at 1,000 hertz of 15, let's say it takes the guy 15 decibels to just barely hear 1,000 hertz. Let's look at this picture here. Let's say it took the guy 15. See where my cursor is? Right there. Say it took him 15 to just barely hear 1,000 hertz. Okay. If that's the case, if I present, so here, that's why I drew the line here at 15. And at 15 dB, he will usually hear 1,000 hertz, about 75% of the time. Using the ascending, descending technique, you'll usually have 2 ascending responses at 15 dB. If that's his threshold, you'll usually hear the tone at 15 dB. If I present the tone, however, at 10, he's almost never going to hear it. See? And if I present the tone at 20, he's always going to hear it. That's what I mean by a steep performance intensity function. Okay? Look at this line here. The decibel distance between getting all the time and none of the time, that decibel distance is short, small. That's like a 10 dB range between getting bugger all or getting all. Okay? I always say the decibel distance between getting all or diddly all is small. That means you've got a steep performance index function or steep performance intensity function. Okay? A steep PI function. Now here's words. This was for pure tones. Look at spondee words. Now what are spondee words? Spondee words are 2-syllable words that are made up of 2 small words. Meatball, cowboy, ice cream, hardware, armchair, sidewalk, cupcake. Okay, all those words. You can't say loser. That's a 2-syllable word, but it's not even emphasis on both syllables, and it's not made from 2 separate words. Spondee words are even 2-syllable words that are made from 2 little words. Okay, and only spondee words in speech will give a steep PI function. Sentences won't. Single-syllable words won't. Nothing will. Syllables won't. The only words whereby you present those words at a level the guy can hear, go down 10 dB. Present those words. Can you still hear it? Yep. Go down 10 dB. Can you still hear it? Nope. Go up 5 dB. Can you hear them then? Yep. Okay, go down 10 dB. Can you hear the words? Nope. Go up 5 dB. Can you hear the words? Nope. Go up 5 dB. Can you hear the words? Yep. 2 ascending responses. Ding. Okay, so just like pure tones, spondee words also give a steep performance intensity function. And that, my fine feathered friends, that is why in speech testing, we use spondee words to test the softest level someone can hear speech. Okay? Because only spondee words will give you the same steep performance intensity function as pure tones will. If I present the guy's threshold for hearing the speech words is 15, if I present the words at 15, he'll usually get them 75% of the time. If I present the words at 10 dB, he'll never get them. Okay, let's look at the performance index function to make that, to share that. If I say the spondee words at 10, he's never going to get them. If I say the spondee words at 15, if that's his threshold, yep, he'll usually get them. If I say the spondee words at 20, he'll always get them. Just like pure tones. Spondees, pure tones, spondees, pure tones, both give identical PI functions. Let's look at single syllable words. Single syllable words. Cow, wall, cup, eye, bell, ring, okay? Sing, single syllable words. If I say those words, let's say your threshold for hearing speech, the spondee words was 15. Let's just make this up, okay? Keep this one here. Now I play the same game using one syllable words. Say the word cow. And I say that, he can't read my lips, and I'm at 10 dB. He's never going to get them, just like the spondees. If I read the words at 15, instead of usually getting them, he'll only get them about 20% of the time. If I say the words at 20, he'll get them about 40% of the time. If I say them at 30, he'll usually get them. If I say them at 40, he'll almost always get them. And if I say them at 50, now he's getting them all. See what I'm saying? So for single syllable words, the performance intensity function is more slanted. The decibel distance, literally, between getting all of them or diddly all of them is no longer small. It's kind of big. It's a big range, about 40 decibel wide. So that's why single syllable words are not, repeat, not used to test the softest level you can hear speech, because they don't give a steep performance intensity function. That's why they're not very good to use for threshold. Okay? You want the word, literally, when you're thinking of the word threshold, it's like the doorway. You're either in the room or you're not. So you want a stimulus whereby you either hear it or you don't. And you want to get rid of false positives and false negatives. You really want a defined threshold. So we test thresholds for pure tones, but after that's done in audiometry, we test thresholds for speech. Now, single syllable words have a use, very good use. Single syllable words, although they don't give a steep performance intensity function, they're very useful. You know what we do with single syllable words? We read them at a comfortable loudness level to the person. Let's say the person's got a mild to moderate hearing loss, a typical elderly person. He can still hear, but he's got a hearing loss. Let me show you, let's just show you on an audiogram what that might look like. I'll just kind of draw a picture here. We'll just kind of, with the cursor, I'll just kind of, here. Let's say the person can hear about here, and then about here, and then in the highs about here. Okay, so his hearing loss kind of slopes down, which is what most elderly people have. They have good hearing in the bass and a moderate degree of hearing loss in the low frequencies. Okay, so let's say now I'm going to do speech audiometry with this person. I'm going to read single syllable words to that person at his most comfortable loudness level, at a level that sounds comfortably loud to that person. So I'm not making them really soft. I'm just reading them at a comfortable loudness. And without letting them see my face, I'm saying, say the word cow, say the word card, say the word wall. And many times this is done with recordings. You've turned up the CD or the recording in the audiometer, and an announcer's voice will come out. Say the word but. Say the word now. Say the word rock. Say the word tree, you know, and you're giving no context. You're not saying, see the big black cat. No, 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 no. You just say the word cat. And what you're doing in that test, that's called speech recognition or speech discrimination. You're testing the clarity of his hearing. And remember what we talked about, differential threshold and frequency resolution and delta F? And remember we said hair cell damage makes your ability to distinguish between frequencies close together, how it fuzzies that up and ruins it a bit? Well, if a person has difficulty with distinguishing frequencies close together because of hair cell damage, guess what? the person will not get 100% of the words that you said correct. He may get 75% of the words. Even though they were presented loud enough to him, his clarity for hearing the words, for understanding what the word was, is compromised. And that's called speech discrimination testing. And that's how we use mono or single syllabic words. So we use spondee words and single syllable words for totally different reasons in this field. Share screen. And that's what all the verbiage here in your notes was about. That's what all of this stuff is about. Okay? I won't read it all to you. You can read that. But having listened to my explanation on the PowerPoint slides, that's exactly what this whole top of the page is talking about. Next. Take a breath. Good. We've covered MAF, MAP, performance intensity functions. Very good. Now let's talk about decibel references. This is going to be review. This is easy. Look, number one, you've got 3 different grounds, okay? 3 different absolute thresholds, 3 different ones. dBSPL. What's the softest it took to hear blah, 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 blah? Okay, and that defined 0 dBSPL. 0 dBSPL represents 0.0002 dynes of pressure against your eardrum. And that was the softest pressure required to hear a 1000 hertz tone at 1 meter distance from a speaker with 2 ears. Hearing aids and machines are measured in dBSPL. Reference number 2 is dBHL. That's hearing level. So that's for the human race. MAP is 0 dBHL, the flat line at the top of the audiogram. Okay? No need to factor in different dBs of sound pressure level at each frequency. The frequencies are built in and understood. dBHL can be interpreted as dB hearing loss, decibels of hearing loss, or decibels hearing level, either one. So 0 decibels HL can mean no decibels of hearing loss or 0 decibels hearing level. Let's look at that. Here's 0 decibels HL. Okay, good. What's normal hearing for adults? Normal hearing for adults is 25 decibels or less. So on the audiogram, normal hearing is anywhere where my cursor is circling. If an adult has 20 decibels of threshold across the hearing level, across the frequencies, that's okay. That's normal. Anything from 25 or less is called normal hearing. When it gets to be 25 to 40, that's a mild loss. When it gets to be from 40 down to 60, that's a moderate hearing loss. Plus 60 down to 80, moderately severe. And 80 to 90, severe. And 90 or more, profound. Okay, that's degrees of hearing loss. All right. The third, here, normal hearing for children, we're more strict. It's 15 decibels or less. And the reason why that is the case is because children need all the hearing they can get to learn language. Adults already know language. So we're not as strict on adults, but children, educationally significant hearing loss is 15 decibels of hearing loss or greater. Okay, remember that. That's very important. Number 3, the third reference is called decibel sensation level. So if you think of dBSPL as the reference for the world, and then dBHL is the reference for the human race, think about dBSL as the reference for you. Okay? dB sensation level. It's the number of decibels required for you in particular to hear something above someone's threshold. Okay, let's say for example, someone can hear a tone down to 0 decibels hearing level. If that tone is presented at 60 decibels hearing level, then you hear it at a sensation level of 60. But now, let's say a person can't hear the tone until it's 50 dBHL, and you present the tone at 60 dBHL. Then that person hears the tone at 10 dB sensation level, because 60 minus 50 is 10. So the reference for dBSL is your hearing threshold, not 0 dBHL, your threshold. So if I'm presenting a 1,000 hertz tone at 90 dBHL and your threshold at 1,000 hertz is 60 dBHL, 90 minus 60 is 30. You hear it at a sensation level of 30. Moving on down, look at that. We're just digesting these little bits here as we go. Audiometers are equipment used to test human hearing. Different decibels SPL at each frequencies are built in and calibrated each year. MAP. We test with circumaural headphones or with insert headphones, either one. And circumaural headphones have this name. Don't ask me why. TDH39. Whatever. Insert headphones have this name. ER-3A. Now I know where that one comes from. Etymotic research. And then the 3A, I don't know why he's got 3A, but I know this one here. Anyway, insert headphones are becoming more common. They're more sanitary. And there's less need for masking. What the heck is that? That means Halloween? No, it has nothing to do with Halloween. Let's say you've got a big hearing loss in this ear, and you don't have hearing loss in this ear. If I'm wearing circumaural headphones, and I put 60 decibels of a tone in this bad ear, it's going to cross the skull, and my good ear is going to hear it. So the thresholds I'm getting here will actually be the thresholds that my good ear picked from across the skull. So your masking means I've got to mask, I got to keep that good ear busy so I can test this bad ear and find out how bad it really is. Okay? With insert headphones, I have to put in about 80 before it can cross over. Circumaural headphones, 60 before it crosses over. Okay, so with insert headphones, there's less need to worry about masking or keeping the good ear busy, because the differences between the ears have to be greater before the sound crosses over. You'll learn more about that in audiometry. Not really in this course, but you will when you hear the word masking. Ding, ding, ding. That's what it is. Keeping the good ear busy while you're testing the bad ear. All right. Carry on. Something here, each headphone type also is calibrated along with the audiometer. You can't just switch headphones on an audiometer, even if they're the same type. So the calibration, when an audiometer is being calibrated, it's tested, it's being calibrated to deliver minimal audible pressure, okay, along with the headphone and the audiometer are as a unit. And then that is used to build in minimal audible pressure. Carry on. Now we can finish today. So anyway, this calibration business, before we leave it, okay, excuse me, MAP is built into the audiometer. And MAP is built into the audiometer while the headphone is attached to the audiometer. The output from the headphone has to match the curve of minimal audible pressure. Okay, the output from the headphone going into someone's ear has to match, this curve. That's why we say the audiometer and headphone need to be attached together when building in minimal audible pressure. But enough on that. Let's talk about why we have two ears. And that's the end, I believe, of this unit. Yep, it's the end. Two-ear hearing. Why do we got two ears? Binaural hearing. There's your readings of it, okay? But here's this weird big word, superior olivary complexes. What the heck is that? Those are inside of your brain stem. They're two little olives. They have a pimento. No, they don't. They're two little round things inside your brain stem. Your brain stem is your spinal cord inside your skull. Remember that from anatomy, okay? Your brain stem is your spinal cord inside your skull. And your brain stem is about a little bit over an inch long. And it's about as big as your pinky. It's kind of like your pinky. That's about how big your brain stem is. The eighth nerves from your cochlea, the eighth cranial nerve, delivers information from your inner ear or cochlea to the brainstem. And then that, of course, goes up to the brain. Okay? So the brain stem is what receives info from your eighth cranial nerves. You have two cranial nerves, one from the right ear and one for the left ear. And the cranial nerves themselves are an inch long. And they carry info from the cochlea to the brainstem. And the brainstem's an inch long. It carries information up to the brain. Good. Okay. Keeping that in mind now. Share screen and look what's written there. Inside your brainstem are two little round cell nuclei called superior olives. And your superior olivary complexes play a big role in binaural hearing, in hearing with both ears. I'll stop sharing again so I can really highlight this, okay? Maybe I'll even draw it on a piece of paper so that it really becomes evident. Here's your brain stem, okay? About an inch long. And I'll draw the eighth nerve and a cochlea. Cochlea, eighth nerve, brainstem. What happens from here? There's your little superior olivary complexes, those two little dots inside your brainstem. Information goes here and here from that ear, and information goes here and here from the other ear. You see what just happened? You got crossover. Information goes up the same side, but it also goes across. Information from this ear goes up the same side, but it also goes across. Superior olivary complexes are the first area of the brainstem to get binaural input from both ears. And that's a very important thing to realize, because two ears help you tell the direction of sound. And it's not just that, oh, this ear's hearing from there, and this ear's hearing from there. It's better than that, and it's more beautiful than that. What's the speed of sound? 1,130 feet per second? 343 meters per second? Okay, if you're talking to me from over here, the sound of your voice is going to hit this left ear a split second before it hits this ear. And your superior olivary complexes are going to say, when did you get the sound? When did you get the sound? Who got it first? Okay? And then they'll decide, they're saying, oh, the left ear got it first. So you're going to turn your head that way. Okay? Also, the superior olivary complexes are comparing the intensity of sound. So between the ears. So if you're talking to me from over here, and I get the sound of your voice is going to be a little bit louder to this ear than it is to this ear, because I have 10 pounds of ugly fat between my ears. This ear suffers from a head shadow, okay? So the left ear is getting the sound of your voice a split second earlier, and the left ear is hearing it a little bit louder, okay? The superior olivary complexes are comparing two things: the time of arrival and the intensity between the ears. And that's how you localize the direction of sound. And for low frequency sounds, your superior olivary complexes are relying on the time of arrival, not so much the intensity. Below 1500 hertz, they rely on the time of arrival. How come? Because low frequency sound waves are long and they bend around things. things. Lows bend, highs bounce. Okay, so they're comparing the time of arrival before sound hit this ear as opposed to when it wrapped around my head and got to this ear. Tiny phase differences, time. But high frequency sound waves are very short and they don't bend, they bounce. So your superior olivary complexes can't use the cue of time of arrival because the waves are too short. They're shorter than the width of my head, okay? So they're not gonna, time of arrival is, can't really be used that way. Rather, instead, your superior olivary complexes are relying on tiny intensity differences. That's the cue that they use to detect the direction of sound. So the biggest faux pas, the biggest problem that a one-eared person has isn't so much hearing sensitivity, because we said 2 ears are only about 5 dB better than 1 ear. So that's not the biggest problem. The biggest problem is telling the direction of sound. Ask anyone who has a big hearing loss in 1 ear. And for an experiment, what you should do is put an earplug in your ear, one of those yellow earplugs, jam that sucker way in your ear canal so that you give yourself a little bit of hearing loss in that ear, and then blindfold yourself and have someone in the room talk to you or make clicking sounds from different directions and see if you can localize the direction of the sound. Bet you'll have lots of mistakes. Unplug the ear, keep yourself blindfolded, you'll have no problem localizing the direction of sound in the room. Okay, and just FYI. So let's look at our notes so we can take this unit home. So that's all of this stuff about superior olivary complexes, blah, blah, blah. Don't worry so much about all the details here. Just rather from what I said in the Zoom session here. Some binaural terms. Monotic is 1 ear. Diotic is identical stimuli to both ears. Dichotic is different stimuli to both ears. We're going to look at dichotic much more in anatomy, just when we're nearly done anatomy. You know why? Because we're going to be looking at the brain, hearing centers of the brain. And children with learning disabilities are often tested with dichotic digits to test if they have learning disabilities. We'll talk about that way later on. Don't worry about it. So the main thing, don't freak about this stuff here. FNO, freak not out, or for nerds only. Don't worry about that. It's got a bit of anatomy in it, so we'll look at that more in anatomy in 120 as we're nearing the end of the semester in anatomy. Okay, but there's a lot of fusion between acoustics and anatomy, as you can tell. So this is kind of an anatomical explanation of the superior olivary complex. Mainly stick to Snickers, stick to what I've been talking about verbally here. All right, so what are the things about 2 ears? Sure, binaural summation. 2 ears are about 5 dB better than 1. 3 to 5 dB better than 1. Okay, there you go. Number 2, this is the big one, localizing the direction of sound. And there it is in writing. For low frequencies, the cue that the superior olivary complexes use is tiny time differences between the ears. For high frequencies above 1,000 hertz, the cue is tiny intensity differences between the ears. And again, you're going to get lots of verbiage here. Don't freak about it. But the thing is, mid-frequencies around 2,000 are the hardest to localize because the superior olivary complexes don't know which cue to use. They get mixed up. But let's look at our PowerPoint and see if we've got a picture of binaural. There you go. Yep, you do. So here's someone hearing the sound from one side. Okay? This ear has a more amplitude because this ear is closer to the sound source. So the wave is taller. Okay? Also, the right ear, the wave is a little bit later. See that? Tiny time differences and tiny intensity differences. Schematic diagram of a sound source. Distance from the sound from the ears is the range. The sound reaches the right ear first, and thus there is a between-ear interaural difference in the arrival time, and the sound at the left ear is also less intense than that in the right ear, leading to an inter or between-ear level difference. Level difference, intensity difference. Intensity differences, time differences. Low frequencies use time differences as the cue to tell the direction. High frequencies, the cue is tiny intensity differences between the ears. Now, that's that one. And if I get out of here and look at our notes, again, this is more specific verbiage about it, but mainly it's what I've been saying verbally here. Stick to that kind of knowledge. Binaural beats, I really don't care. Let's just kind of leave that one alone. You can read it for yourselves, but I'm not really going to test anybody on it. It's just kind of whatever. Look at number 4. This is a big one. Well, sort of. Not quite as important as directionality, but it's called the binaural cocktail effect. And it's often tested by the masking level difference test, but don't worry about that. 2 ears are comparing the sound that you want to hear as well as the noise to both ears. Let's say you're at a party, and I'm standing about a yard away from you, and we're talking, but there's a lot of noise around. There's a lot of background. There's other people talking. There's other people in the room. There's kind of a noisy room. Well, you have 2 ears. You're listening to my speech with 2 ears, but you're also hearing the background noise with 2 ears, right? So there's 4 things being compared here. The speech you want to hear to this ear, the speech you want to hear to this ear, the background noise to this ear, and the background noise to this ear. So let's look at it in a picture. Here you go. And when's the guy unhappy, and when is he happy? Okay, he's unhappy if the sound he wants to hear is identical in both ears, and if the noise he's hearing is identical. So if there's no difference in the phase of the speech and the noise, he's going to have a harder time picking out the speech. But now look, there's something different. The speech or the sound you want to hear is inverted in phase between the ears, and yet the noise is the same. That person's happier. Something's different. Either the signal is different in phase or the noise is different in phase, but by gum, something's different between the ears. If that's the case, yep, you're happier. That's called the binaural cocktail effect. Now, look at what happens if the pure tone is removed from one ear. That person's also happy. You see, because there's something different. Isn't that weird? Binaural cocktail effect. And you can only have this if you've got 2 ears. A one-eared person doesn't have this. Let me give you an example of this third one. You may hear of, or I'll just tell you, you know those little airplanes, Cessnas, the little airplanes that sit 2 to 4 people? They're loud, okay? The cockpit, you're sitting in there, those things, you gotta have headphones on because they're really loud. Many times, the pilot may be having a hard time hearing the messages from the tower when he or she is trying to land the plane or whatever. And they're trying to listen through the headphones, but the cockpit noise is really competing with the sound they're trying to hear. Many times the pilot will take off one headphone and put it here. And that's what this third one. And you can actually hear a little bit better. Isn't that weird? I draw it like this. I've got 5 situations. If the signal, notice this is in italics, so it's different. If there's something different in the speech or signal that you want to hear, and the noise is identical, but the signal, there's something different, you're happy. If the signal is identical, but there's something different about the noise, see one's italics, the other one's not, you're happy. If the signal is present and it's removed out of this ear, but the noise is identical, you're happy. That's like this example here. Okay, so that when you get to having everything identical, you're not happy. And look at the bottom one. If you've only got one ear, so you can't be comparing, there's nothing to compare between ears, you're not happy. So Three things basically that deafness in one ear gives you. Lack of binaural summation. Lack of 2 ears are about 5 dB better than 1. Lack of, number 2, telling the direction of sound. That's another one. And the third one is the binaural cocktail effect. Difficulty hearing speech and background noise. If you got one ear, you have a harder time hearing speech in background noise for precisely the reasons that the PowerPoint slide is showing you. Okay, here, the bottom one. Okay, this person doesn't get the binaural cocktail effect. He doesn't experience it because he hasn't got 2 ears. So 3 things when you've got deafness in one ear. 3 things show the advantage of binaural hearing as opposed to monaural hearing. Okay, that's what that whole last page in the notes is about. Binaural hearing and what's the advantages of having it. 3 main things: binaural summation, localizing the direction of sound, and the binaural cocktail effect. Okay, there we go. We are done Unit 4. This is the way to go through it. Okay, verbally, looking at your notes, listening to the Zoom session. You want to wind it up and listen to it again, go for it. Remember, a class is 3 credits. 3 credits means 3 hours of class time. Well, you got 1 hour of class time a week. So I know this is kind of weird and heady material to grasp, but it's very important that you do, because the foundations of the whole course, of the whole program, is one is acoustics, the other one's anatomy. So we'll see anybody in about an hour in 120, anatomy. I'll stop recording now. Adios. See you when we look at you.